Now we will discuss about hormones. What are hormones? Hormones are non-nutrient chemicals which act as intercellular messengers. Hormones are non-nutrient chemicals which act as intercellular messengers. They are produced in trace amounts. Hormones are mostly produced and secreted by endocrine glands. However, there are several other tissues or organs which also produce and secrete hormones. Classical hormone producing organs are pituitary gland, pineal gland, thyroid gland, parathyroid glands and adrenal glands. There are many organs which have other primary functions but also secrete hormones. Examples include hypothalamus, pancreas, liver, gonads, that is testes in males and ovaries in females, kidneys, heart, stomach, small intestine, adipose tissue, that is fat, and placenta during pregnancy. So these are the organs which have other primary functions but also secrete hormones. So we can say that hormones are non-nutrient chemical messengers which are produced and secreted by specialized endocrine cells which may be present in endocrine glands like pituitary, thyroid, etc. or in other organs that have additional functions. Examples include heart, kidneys, stomach, intestine, etc. Hormones work as chemical messengers. They are released into the bloodstream by endocrine cells and travel to the target cells that have their appropriate receptors. So, although hormone circulates throughout the body through blood and reaches many tissues, but it acts only on specific target cells by binding to specific proteins called hormone receptors to produce their desired effect. Once hormone binds to its receptor, it triggers a specific response in the target cell. Hormone receptors can be present on the cell membrane of the target cell or they can be present inside the target cell. This is very important to classify the hormone receptors. Hormone receptors can be present on the cell membrane, that is on the surface of the cell. So hormone receptors can be present on the cell membrane of the target cells or they can be present inside the target cells. Hormone receptors which are present on the cell membrane of the target cells are called membrane bound receptors. Whereas the receptors which are present inside the target cells are called intracellular receptors. Intracellular receptors are mostly nuclear receptors, that is, they are present in the nucleus. Although intracellular receptors can be present in the cytoplasm, but mostly they are present in the nucleus. Now, water-soluble hormones like peptide hormones, as for example insulin, glucagon, etc., or amino acid derivatives like catecholamines, as for example adrenaline, noradrenaline. These water-soluble hormones cannot cross the cell membrane, thus their receptors are present on the cell membrane of the target cells. While on the other hand, lipid-soluble hormones like steroid hormones, as for example cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, etc., and iodothyronins, that is thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, can diffuse through the cell membrane and can bind to the intracellular receptors present in the cytoplasm or a nucleus. So lipid soluble hormones can diffuse through the cell membrane and can bind to the intracellular receptors present within the cell, either in the cytoplasm or a nucleus. As mentioned earlier, intracellular receptors are mostly nuclear receptors. So examples of lipid soluble hormones could be steroid hormones, as for example cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, etc., or iodothyronins, that is thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. Here we should know that water-soluble hormones produce rapid but relatively slow-lived effect, whereas lipid-soluble hormones produce slower but long-lasting effects. Now we will discuss about the classification of the hormones. On the basis of chemical nature, hormones are divided into 4 groups. They are peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones, steroid hormones, iodothyronins and amino acid derivative. Here it needs to be mentioned that iodothyronins are also a type of amino acid derivative. So we can say that hormones can be classified as peptide hormones, steroid hormones and amino acid derivatives, but more specifically we can classify hormones depending upon their chemical nature as hormones are divided into 4 groups. They are peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones, steroid hormones, iodothyronins, and amino acid derivatives. But it should be noted that iodothyronins are also a type of amino acid derivative. Now I will give the examples of each classification of hormones. First, I will give the examples of peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones. The examples of peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones could be insulin, glucagon and somatostatin, which are secreted from the pancreas. All pituitary hormones, including the two neurohormones oxytocin and vasopressin, are examples of peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones. But here it is to be noted that this oxytocin and vasopressin, that means these two neurohormones, are not produced by the pituitary. They are produced in the hypothalamus and they are stored in the pituitary and they are released from the pituitary when needed. Calcitonin, which is secreted from the thyroid gland, and parathyroid hormone, which is secreted from the parathyroid gland, are examples of peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones. All hypothalamic hormones except dopamine are protein hormones. Here it is to be noted that dopamine is produced both by hypothalamus and adrenal medulla, although their roles are different. Gastrointestinal hormones like gastrin, secretin, cholecystokinin and gastric inhibitory peptide are protein hormones. Atrial natriuretic peptide, which is secreted from the heart, is a protein hormone. So all these are examples of peptide, polypeptide or protein hormones. Now I will give example of steroid hormones. Examples of steroid hormone could be cortisol, aldosterone and androgens like DHEA, which is secreted from adrenal cortex, that is the cortex region of the adrenal gland. Testosterone, which is secreted from the testes, and estrogen and progesterone, which are secreted from the ovaries, are examples of steroid hormones. Here it is to be noted that estrogen and progesterone are also secreted by placenta during pregnancy. Please remember that all steroid hormones are derived from cholesterol. Now I will give examples of iodothyronins. From the name itself it is clear that the examples of iodothyronins are thyroid hormones, that is T3 and T4. Now I will give examples of amino acid derivative hormones. Examples of amino acid derivative hormones could be adrenaline, noradrenaline and dopamine, which are collectively called as catecholamines, which are secreted from the adrenal medulla. So adrenaline, noradrenaline and dopamine, that is the catecholamines, which are secreted from adrenal medulla, are example of amino acid derivatives. Moreover, melatonin, which is secreted from pineal gland, is an example of amino acid derivative. Here it is to be noted that already I have discussed earlier that although thyroid hormones T3 and T4 are classified as iodothyronins, they are also amino acid derivative. So this is all about the classification of hormones. So we have already learned that what are hormones, how the hormone act, what are hormone receptors, what are the different types of hormone receptors, and what are the various classification of hormones supported by the examples.